Darn it! Even though we're doing the same thing, that monster isn't losing any strength!
Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 is what I call the forgotten Budokai game. It's not that people don't remember it, but more so that they just don't talk about it. Because of that, I went into the game expecting it to either be disappointing, droll, or just too similar to its predecessor to stand out. To my pleasant surprise, however, Budokai 2 kinda rocks. I'll get into the reasons why later in the video, but what I will say right now is that it is totally fair to call this game a better version of the first game. Part of the reason this is such a surprise to me is that while I did play the first Budokai in my youth, I never got to try this one. While it did nearly happen, circumstances didn't align and I just never got my hands on it. So this was my first time experiencing this one, and it had a lot more surprises in store for me than I think I was expecting. Budokai 2 was released in Europe and Australia in November and North America in December of 2003, roughly 1 year after the original Budokai had launched, and strangely enough, it launched in February of 2004 for Japanese audiences. I'm not sure why they delayed it like that either. I'd have expected it to launch there first, if anything. The same studio who developed the first game, Dimps, are back this time around only a year after the release of the first game, so there will be a lot of similarities as this one is more of an expansion on the original with some attempts and new and interesting mechanics. Whereas the original Budokai only covered the Saiyan saga through the Cell Game saga, Budokai 2 takes the game through the rest of the series all the way to the end by including the previously absent Buu arcs into the game. This comes with the benefit of many of the most popular characters and transformations from the Buu sagas like Super Saiyan 3 Goku, Majin Vegeta, and of course Vegito. Unlike the original though, Budokai 2 does not feature any cutscenes to tell the story. Moreover, it doesn't even tell the same story at all, but I'll get to that in a minute. Just like the last title, Budokai 2 released first and foremost for the Sony PlayStation 2 and then followed up with a GameCube release a year later. Both versions are nearly identical this time, however, with the only differences being a few additional difficulty settings and costumes to unlock. For this video, I've opted to cover the PS2 version as it was the first release of Budokai 2 for the public to purchase, making this the version more people would have experienced. Also, I've never owned a GameCube before in my life, so this version just felt more familiar to me. I talked a lot about how important the original Budokai was to a lot of fans due to its ability to tell the story of the series in a way where people could experience a version of it all the way through, or at least through to the Cell games. So I was kind of expecting this game to follow up on that same premise, but just extend the courtesy to the whole series this time. I knew going in that the elaborate cutscenes weren't going to be around this time due to seeing that in my research for the first game, but I was still expecting this one to hit all of the same highlights we've come to expect, but with the added Buu storylines. So, how does Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 tell its story? Let's get into it. When I was talking about Budokai 1, I had a lot of positive things to say about the high production value of the cutscenes. The development team really went above and beyond to animate and deliver a bullet point CG movie of the main events from the anime throughout the first game. The issue was that doing so with such an emphasis on those cutscenes took too much attention from the other aspects of the game, which left a lot of the other offerings to feel underwhelming and undercooked. So the way Budokai 2 decided to rectify this issue is by just removing it outright. As far as I could find, there's not a single cutscene in this whole game except the intro video. Even the story mode has been replaced in its entirety with a brand new take on how to play through the events of the anime storyline. And boy is it something. What we have is a whole new game mode called Dragon World, wherein a series of events parallel to but not replicative of the events of the main series occur. As you can see here, they've done away with the chapter listings and replaced it all with a fun little mini-game that resembles a board game. The map acts as a 3D base for the board, and each character is their own little object that gets moved around the board as the game progresses. Like a little player piece you'd see in Monopoly or something. Scattered throughout the map are these interesting little objects we can try to get to and grab before our opponents can. Sometimes we even have to dig to find them, and I mean literally dig, as in each time your character lands on a space, they can press square to dig on that space and see if anything has been hidden there. which the game does not tell you and I did not figure out until I was over halfway through my first run of Dragon World. These objects range in what they could be, from item to use in upgrading or customizing our characters, power boosts for the minigame itself, zenny to spend on the in-game shop, or just a straight up Dragon Ball. The game is played in turns. The player gets a turn and then the enemy gets a turn. In your turn, each of your characters receives one move that they can use to progress across the board. Later on, Goku's character receives an additional move, letting him move 2 times in one turn. Goku's character is the only character to receive this, with one exception later on. The same is true of character models. While all of the characters on the board are just little game pieces, Goku gets his own fully animated 3D figure that runs around the board, which again only has one exception later on. I'm not really sure why they did it this way, but they did. Right from the get-go, the player can choose at least 2 characters to use on the board at once, and they don't in any way have to make canon sense. For instance, you can throw adult Gohan on the board during the Saiyan Saga and just play with him if that's what you want. Which isn't a bad idea because he can get upgraded pretty quickly. The characters you're allowed to choose are limited sometimes, like not being able to pick Vegeta if he has to be an enemy on the board. Of course, when you end up colliding with one of the enemy board pieces, conflict will ensue. Oftentimes there will be a little dialogue exchange between the characters, depending on if it makes sense canonically.
You're Kakarot, aren't you? What have you guys come to this planet for?
What are we here for? We came for the things you call Dragon Balls. After we kill everyone on this planet, that is. Lend us a hand, would you, Kakarot?
What are you going to use the Dragon Balls for?
That does not matter. Come with us and join Master Frieza.
So this Frieza guy's your boss, huh? I would never join anyone like that. And what's more, my name is Goku.
And when 2 characters that would not have ever fought canonically end up facing off, a short piece of unvoiced dialogue appears and then the fight commences. I honestly think the whole mechanic is kind of neat, and it makes this DBZ game feel super unique in that it offers an experience you can't find in any of the other games. Because of the way Dragon World is structured, the developers opted to tell an Elseworld variation of the events from the main series. The story here is still very similar, but it does do a few things very different to offer a unique telling all its own. So let's talk about what makes the story of Budokai 2 so unique.
You guys get off of Earth right now! Otherwise, you'll answer to me!
It's sort of a joke in the Dragon Ball community that we fans have played through the exact events of the series like a million times across the different games, but in this instance, that isn't quite the case. The story opens on Earth with the arrival of Raditz like normal, except Nappa is with him. No Vegeta this time, like at all. So we're tasked with racing Nappa and Raditz to the Dragon Ball, or taking them out before they can reach it. Of course, they'll be spawning Cybermen the whole way as well. Goku doesn't die here though, and he's able to overcome both Raditz and Nappa. Following that, rather than ever going to Namek since there was no need, Frieza, Recoome, and Captain Ginyu come straight to Earth to find the Dragon Balls here. Weird, I know, right? But Goku fights them all off here in the Arctic one by one, then chases them to Namek from there, where Vegeta finally shows up as a villain, but way later than he did in the show. Namek is actually one of the most, if not the most normal arc in the game. The Namek level progresses pretty much like you would expect. Vegeta starts as a villain until we beat him and we unlock him as a hero against Frieza. Then we work our way through Recoome, Ginyu, and ultimately face off against Frieza. Make sure you beat Frieza with Goku and not someone else, because you'll be forced into using Goku more than any other character throughout the game, and if you don't unlock Super Saiyan right there by beating Frieza, you won't unlock it via progression at all. But you will unlock the other forms, and they will be unusable to you without the initial transformation. And as the enemies get harder, you'll be sorely missing that ability. Although you can probably just go buy it in the shop, I didn't think to try that. But since I beat Frieza with Vegeta, I got Super Saiyan for him a little bit early, which is cool.
Let Frieza or anyone else come at me. During that last battle, my Super Saiyan powers were awakened.
Are you sure about that, Vegeta? Or have you just become so terrified that it is affecting your sanity?
Go ahead and laugh while you can, because standing before you is that which you have feared most. Super Vegeta!
I've talked before on the channel how I like to main Vegeta in my DBZ games, and I tried to do that as much as possible here too. So eventually we beat down Frieza and move on to the Android arc. So far things look like they did in the show. We've got old Dr. Gero as the first bad guy, just like in the series, except for some reason he's got his own army of Cybermen. One very odd decision is the omission of Android 19. Try as I might, I can't think of a reason not to have included him here. They have other less important characters than 19, and 19 makes way more sense to be here given that he was the demonstration for Vegeta's Super Saiyan transformation. Not to mention his fight with Super Saiyan Goku is easily one of the highlights of the Android saga. Instead, we just get a litter of Cybermen. I can't help but feel like this was a bad move, and it's not like his character would have been all that hard to include. Once we beat Gero, the other androids appear as you would expect, 16, 17, and 18. I guess you call them cyborgs if you want, but I'm so used to calling them androids at this point, I'm just sticking to it.
Well, if it isn't Vegeta. I was hoping it was going to be Goku.
What? I'm going to turn you into spare parts, you toaster!
We run a few battles against these guys, and suddenly, something happens.
Who is that?
My name is Cell. I am an android created by Dr. Gero. Thanks to you, I was able to absorb 17 and 18 and attain my perfect form. I'm so grateful.
In this timeline, Cell gets the jump on 17 and 18 right away and achieves his perfect form. Meaning from here, it's all a matter of carving through his Cell Juniors to get to him. Again, this progresses as you would expect, but there's no Teen Gohan. Just adult Gohan, so weird. I just beat him with Goku instead, which is the way the game intended actually. And again, that's odd. I can't figure out why adult Gohan was selectable from the start, but Teen Gohan wasn't. Even weirder is that Teen Gohan is in the game. Like he's a character and you can unlock him, but in order to do so, you have to beat Cell in Dragon World during the second Buu stage as adult Gohan. Shouldn't it be the other way around? I feel like Teen Gohan should have been selectable from the start and you could unlock adult Gohan by beating Super Buu or something. I don't get it. Either way, we beat Cell and finish this stage. We then fast forward to the Babidi arc now, where Goku has to fight against the Supreme Kai. Right, so they bothered to include his character but not Android 19? Either way, this is where things start getting really weird. We beat Supreme Kai and Babidi appears with Deborah, as you'd expect. Vegeta gets turned into Majin Vegeta and all seems normal. Then all of a sudden, this happens.
Oh, have I been brought back to life?
What is this?
Majin Cell and Majin Frieza is not something I ever thought I'd see. And actually thinking about it, what a really cool concept too. Although they don't do much with it besides use it as an excuse to have these characters as pieces on the board throughout these arcs. No matter, Goku races to Buu's pod to destroy it when all of a sudden Babidi teleports himself and his minions to what I think is another planet? I'm not sure actually. This is where we have to defeat Deborah, Majin Vegeta, Majin Cell, and Majin Frieza. Oh, and of course, before we can even get to that point, Buu hatches. This whole area feels more like filler to me than anything, but we can have some very cool battles here, including our multiple fights against Majin Vegeta.
Vegeta, cut it out! This is really not the time for us to be fighting.
Stop your blabbering, coward! I won't let you squirm your way out of this. I've waited too long!
Eventually, we have to go confront Buu for a few rounds until everything changes yet again. We're now placed on a board inside the hyperbolic time chamber, but Gotenks is a playable character now, which is honestly really cool. He can go straight to Super Saiyan 3, and he's a really powerful character too. Of all of the underutilized characters throughout the series, Gotenks is easily top 3. The usual suspects are back on the board again too, Frieza, Cell, and Super Buu. So you would think it's a matter of working our way through them all. Except...
I like your head. I think I'll take it. What?
I wish I'd have gotten to fight him while looking like that, but right after he absorbs Cell, he absorbs Frieza next, and looks like that instead. Fighting Frieza Buu, we see that they even bothered to do a voice file that made Super Buu sound like Frieza.
Saiyan? This guy smells like a Saiyan!
This game is actually wild. After a few battles, Buu absorbs Gotenks as per usual, and we transport back to Earth on a new board. We're in a city now, and Buu absorbs Gohan. We're pretty much back to parallel with the original timeline now, which means Supreme Kai gives Goku the Potara earrings, and we meet up with Vegeta to fuse. Finally, we get to see one of the most iconic yet short-lived Dragon Ball characters ever made, fully realized. Vegito is so overpowered in this game too, and finally getting to play as him felt like such a payoff by this point in the mode. Not to mention, he is that exception character I was talking about before, where he can have 2 moves per turn, and he gets his own 3D model like Goku had. We're nearing the end of the game here, but we do get a solid few battles as Vegito to knock Buu around, and like I said, it's really satisfying. It's not over just yet though. After beating the absorption right out of Buu, he reverts to his Kid Buu form, and we teleport to Supreme Kai's planet. And look, the Z-Sword is even back there. That's cool. This begins the final battle. We're all in, and the usual suspects are put back on the board. Frieza and Cell will be hopping around trying to get in our way the whole time we play this section. Normally I predict this section would be a lot easier, but given I still had not unlocked the Super Saiyan ability for Goku, and as such could not use Super Saiyan 3 against Kid Buu, meant it was all a pretty hard ordeal to handle. Cell Juniors are back being a nuisance again too. You may have seen a few things on the different boards you've got questions about, so let me talk about them a little bit before we wrap up the story. Mr. Popo is often scattered around various places across the individual boards, and by landing on his space, he will use the carpet to teleport you to different part of the board, which might sound useful until you realize that you can't pick where he puts you, and you don't know where he'll put you until you do it. So it's always a little bit of a risk hitting one of his spaces, although sometimes it is necessary.
You wanna go at it, you piece of trash?
The spaces with the little half-heart icons next to them symbolize that if you have a fight on that space, then both players will rapidly lose health throughout the battle automatically. And the flame with the down arrow means you'll rapidly lose energy instead. Then there's a space that starts you with no energy, and one that just halves your HP from the beginning of the match. So just be aware of the spaces you are going on the board before you land on one that hands you a fat L because you weren't paying attention. Back to Kid Buu, it took me running between both Vegeta and Goku to chip his health down, but hey, that's accurate to the show at least. By cornering him with each character, I just swapped them and ate a few losses until he gave out and I won. If you collected all of the Dragon Balls throughout the mode, then you can make a wish here, which I had used on wishing for the Babidi spaceship mode. And given that the breakthroughs are a lot more useful in this game than they were in the first one, it may actually be worth it to play through the Dragon mode to collect the Dragon Balls. While I'm talking about this now, let me just say that this is such a massive improvement over the last game. Collecting the Dragon Balls in this game is actually fun and feels like a part of the experience instead of a grinding waste of your time. Being such an important aspect of the anime, I'm glad to say that this game actually figured out how to make collecting Dragon Balls somewhat fun and interesting. It may even be the first Dragon Ball game to do so. And that's the Dragon World mode for Budokai 2. It's got an enormous amount of replayability too, since you can always replay it with everything you've unlocked, making it all so much easier. Like beating Raditz down with the Super Saiyan 3 Goku, for instance, is pretty funny. Not to mention the allure of seeing how many things might play out a little differently. Like maybe in your second run you'll fight Cell Buu instead of Frieza Buu, or try beating Super Buu without fusing into Vegito. There's a ton of possibilities here for how playthroughs could vary, so they really nailed it with this one. I'm glad to say that the Dragon World mode is a successful attempt at trying something new with how a Dragon Ball Z game tells its story. Before we move on, I just wanted to take a quick break to talk to my fellow gym junkie Dragon Ball fans about a brand I'm partnered with called SuperX. I personally use a lot of their attire in the gym, and it's some of the most high quality and aesthetically pleasing gym wear on the market. Partnered with some huge brands and creators like Mike O'Hearn, Hasbro, and even Power Rangers, SuperX constantly puts out the best superhero-inspired gym gear available. More relevantly, their Phase Z drop features an exclusive hoodie modeled after our favorite Saiyan Prince with a pair of matching joggers. Not to mention a Broly-inspired shirt and a Frieza compression shirt. If what you're seeing on screen is exciting, then click my link in the description or use my code evprince for 10% off of whatever you buy. If you've been looking at starting your training to become a better you and DBZ is a huge source of gym-spiration for you like it is for me, then this kind of gear could be just what you need to get started. So head over to SuperX, get your gear, and start training. Now, what would a Dragon Ball game be without a World Martial Arts Tournament mode? Just like in the first game, Budokai 2 lets you play through a series of randomized tournaments against various characters from across the game in order to win and walk away with a grand prize. There's very few real changes to the mode overall. It still functions exactly the same with the same rewards for winning. Returning again are the 3 different categories which act sort of as difficulties, those being Novice, Adept, and Advanced. Once again, the player is only given the Novice mode by default and must finish each mode at least once to open the option of getting the next category, which is once again purchased through the in-game skill shop. The prize Zenny is identical to the first game. Upon winning, the player will receive 10,000 for Novice, 30,000 for Adept, and 50,000 for Advanced. All of which is pretty standard practice from what we've seen so far, and with each progressing match, the AI will get more difficult as well. So it's a good thing you can do edits and customizations to your character that give you an edge, but I'll get to that in a minute. Once you've gotten what you want out of the World Martial Arts Tournament, we've got a brand new hidden mode to play with too. Now, Budokai 1 had a hidden unlockable mode, but I was pretty critical of it. I thought the last game was not nearly polished enough to warrant whatever time they expended to create and implement the hidden mode called The Legend of Hercule, and that the mode itself wasn't fun or interesting enough to justify its own existence. This time around, however, I did find Budokai 2 a little more polished overall, and everything seemed to function well enough that a little bonus mode didn't feel quite so unjustified. Not to mention, this new mode is better too. Babidi's Spaceship is a very thematically appropriate game mode that fits right in with Budokai 2's heavy Buu era focus, and winds up being far more fun and interesting than the previous hidden mode. The mode shows us a depiction of Babidi's ship, resembling very closely the ship's design from the manga itself, with multiple levels to work through. Each stage features a different challenge for the player to overcome. Stage 1 is arguably the most simple. You're pitted against an opponent, and every time you beat him, he gets back up stronger than the last time. The more times you defeat that opponent, the larger your reward will be. I tended to average about 5 or 6 victories before I finally took an L. Stage 2 is totally different, as you're tasked with surviving against an onslaught of attacks from an invincible enemy. The longer you survive, the better your reward, but this tended to be the hardest mode for me, as I struggle as a defensive fighter typically. Stage 3 takes the previous mode and inverts it. Now you're on a timer to see how many hits you can land before it runs out. I was much better at this mode. The AI is great at defending, so you just gotta be efficient with block breaking and landing combos that maintain a flow. Finally, Stage 4 is easily the simplest of them all. You're put once again on a timer and have to see how many ki blasts you can bounce back towards your opponent. Deflecting them doesn't count, you've got to time your block and hit them back. I've got the hang of this one pretty quickly, but it got old really quickly too, and I was just sick of it after a few times. So what are the rewards I've been mentioning for completing these tasks? Well, the way the mode is designed is actually uniquely catered to how Bobbity hatched Boo's pod in the series. The more fights he can feed from, the more Keely energy gets fed into Boo's pod, which means depending on your performance on any one of these stages, you will be rewarded with a certain number of Keely, which goes straight into the Keely meter on the left. At certain points as the meter fills, you will unlock new items, abilities, and even full characters. Pretty much everything related to Bobbity, Boo, or the Majin characters comes from earning Keely energy points in this mode. All of this culminates into what I found to be a pretty fun game mode to play with. At first. The truth is that it just takes way too much time to earn these points. By the time I got a quarter of the way through, it was starting to feel like a grind already. And at some point, it starts to feel less like a game and more like a chore, which is never a feeling you want to elicit from a video game. Even so, it's still a significant upgrade from the previous game's hidden bonus mode. Speaking of improvements, let's talk about Budokai 2's in-game skill shop. Instead of going to Mr. Popo to buy things, we'll be heading over to Capsule Corp to buy them the right way, and it's just a more appealing and rewarding system this time. First and foremost, since you find the Dragon Balls in Dragon World, you don't have to waste away hours of your life trying to grind the shop to get a single Dragon Ball at random. Not to mention the availability of items is now much better, with more options. It helps a lot that you earn money through the Dragon World mode too now, because it means you don't have to just replay the World Martial Arts Tournament on repeat to get the Zenny you need to buy items. These might sound like some small little changes, but I cannot elaborate just how much of a difference they make to the overall quality of the game. Plus, there's actually a little exploit you can abuse to max out all of the items in just a few minutes if you want. Then of course, if you've got a friend over and just want to go for some good old-fashioned 1v1, Budokai 2's duel mode lets you go up against a friend with whatever characters you want, with whatever settings you want, on whatever map you want. An absolute must-have for any fighting game. But something new that's pretty cool is the added feature of making the game fight itself. You can actually select the characters and let the computer battle it out against itself to declare a victor. It sounds like it'd be boring, but I kind of enjoyed running the different scenarios on this one. Then there's one last mode you can use to set the attitude of your opponent, and just train to get combos and attacks down better if you want to improve your game before tackling a difficult game mode. These are all of the different game modes of Budokai 2, and I feel confident in saying that it's a pretty excellent selection. So how about the gameplay itself? Has that improved at all? While not a lot, it has improved in some very meaningful ways. This is very much the same kind of game as Budokai 1 and feels very nearly identical to it in a lot of ways. That said, there are a much higher density of attacks, skills, and items to play with this time, resulting in what feels like a more dynamic and all-around larger gameplay experience. That said, I feel like the single greatest improvement comes to the transformations. In Budokai 1, the transformations, particularly the Super Saiyan transformations, were so difficult to maintain during a fight, and the boost it offered felt so insignificant that even bothering to use it just seemed like a complete waste of time. It drained your energy insanely quickly, and it seemed like if you even took one wrong hit, it would shut down. This time, the forms drain far less energy and hold through much more punishment. Even the Super Saiyan 3 form, which drains the most energy the fastest, manages to still feel exciting and rewarding to utilize at the right time. It can feel hard to tell just how much of a power boost it is sometimes, and it's definitely not like a game changer during combat, but being able to go Super Saiyan during a fight feels so necessary to fulfilling that Dragon Ball Z fantasy for the player even on a visual level, that its correction in this game is perhaps one of its single greatest improvements. One of the more questionable decisions, however, was the choices the developers made for their character roster. I was pretty critical of Budokai 1's character roster for choosing to include some seemingly derivative characters while choosing to omit some characters I'd have considered more important. Well, although that issue isn't quite as egregious this time, it is most definitely still present. All of the big names are back, of course, Goku and the Z-Fighters, Frieza, Cell, etc. And we of course have some of the Buu arc major players coming in to join the roster. Buu in his 3 iconic forms, Deborah, Videl, Goten, Trunks, who obviously bring with them Gotenks. Which fusion in general, being a new mechanic, brought with it a variation of the characters that were honestly sort of a waste of time. Did we really need Tiancha and Gokul to be in this game? There's a time for joke characters, but I would have probably enjoyed their inclusion a bit more if we weren't missing some major players like Android 19 or Zarbon.
Merging with Mr. Satan would give me such a small boost, it might as well be nothing.
You're telling me they had time to program the Great Saiyaman, his own character, with his own moveset, but couldn't bother to throw Zarbon into the Namek Saga? I get they were pulling back on the non-Buu arcs to focus on giving a Buu-centric DBZ game since Budokai 1 didn't have any of this, but it still feels like maybe it wasn't to the game's benefit. I mean, are we better off having Supreme Kai be a character, but not having Birder or Jeice? I mean, some of the new inclusions were really cool. I liked having Videl and Hercule come back, and to be honest, at least they let the Potara fusion work on Supreme Kai to become Kibito Kai. There are a lot of characters here, and there's a decent amount of things you can do to play with them and enjoy the whole experience, but it does feel like there were some characters who didn't need to be there, and some characters that did. I know I keep complaining about Great Saiyaman, but Adult Gohan literally has a costume variation with him in his Great Saiyaman outfit, in addition to having Great Saiyaman be his own character. Meanwhile, both Frieza and Cell only get their final forms to play with. That's it. So once again, it just felt to me that they were all over the place with their roster selection is all. Something else to note is that the Japanese release of Budokai 2 actually received extra content that the Western release didn't see. These extras included a brand new mode for the World Martial Arts Tournament called the Cell Games Rules, which is really just the advanced bout, but where fusions are allowed. An additional overall difficulty level called the Z difficulty, an extra costume for Frieza that makes him look like his son, Kuriza, and an entire extra level in Dragon World. Some of these features would eventually cross the ocean to the West for the GameCube release, but PS2 users were just out of luck. Even still, Budokai 2 is utterly stuffed with content, and there is zero doubt that fans of the franchise will have plenty to play with here. I'd call Budokai 2 a triumphant improvement over its predecessor in pretty much every single way. Not only does Budokai 2 offer several very unique things you won't find in other games, like the different Buu absorption variations, unique fusions, and of course, an elsewhere plotline through its dynamic Dragon World mode, it also offers better gameplay, better game modes, more variety, and an overall more polished experience. I can remember the day I first saw Budokai 2 on the internet so many years ago. I must have been maybe 9 years old. The image of Vegito and Kid Buu in the background. I knew I had to have it. So I asked to get it for Christmas, but instead I got Budokai 3. Which, I mean, I'm not complaining, nor did I complain then. That's one of the best DBZ games ever. Even still, the fact that I never played this has always kind of lingered in the back of my mind. I often wondered what this game was like, what I didn't see back then. After the HD collection came out and didn't feature this title, I assumed it must have been a flop. So it's a little strange that after playing it, I can not only see so much of the DNA that would make up the threequel, but can say with absolute certainty that this game is better than Budokai 1 in pretty much every way. I imagine the reason they chose to remaster Budokai 1 instead of 2 is because of the extensive cutscenes we saw throughout that game, and while those are good, I think the Dragon World in this game is actually more fun and more valuable than those cutscenes were. I can honestly say that I really enjoyed my time with Budokai 2, and while it had its occasional downfall, it wasn't half as infuriating as its predecessor was to play. If you're a big fan of the series, and hoping to find a fresh and fun way to re-experience the series, then I would far sooner recommend Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 over its predecessor. Alright, now it's time to talk cover arts. As these older games were wont to do, Budokai 2 released with 3 different cover arts across the 3 different regions it launched in. So I'm going to show those 3 cover arts on screen now. I'll be honest, this is kind of the hardest one of these I've done so far, because all of them are pretty well designed, and all of them have some things that I don't like. I do want to say, for once, I actually really like all 3 of the options a lot. That being said, right away, I see something I don't like, and that's the extreme usage of Goku. These covers are using Vegito to demonstrate that he is in the game, set it apart from the first game, and declare that Buu content is actually in the game. Smart move, I'm on board with that. However, both the EU and JP covers surround Vegito with both Super Saiyan 1 and 3 Goku variations. From a marketing standpoint, I do get it. He is super marketable, and both of these forms are as well. However, it really sucks that it's all just Goku everywhere. I like that the US version throws Gotenks in the mix, since he's repping the iconic Super Saiyan 3 transformation and he's a cool character. Behind everyone is Kid Buu as the clear overarching villain. Goku is in the background, but at least there is some restraint here on his character as it shows him in his base form with the Spirit Bomb. That's relevant to how they actually beat Kid Buu, so I like it. I feel like the logo is most legible here as well. The leaning on the off-white color and the cleared palette background for the logo to pop is very smooth. I like what the EU case has going on as well, but once again, it feels a little too busy for my taste. The logo is less legible this time, and the intensity of Vegito's character feels sidelined to the multiple Gokus around him. I feel like I can confidently say this is the weakest of the 3. I do like the explosion of pink from Kid Buu's character and the glossy look of the logo. As for the Japanese cover art, it's my favorite design-wise. I just hate that it's Vegito with 2 Gokus again. I wish it had been this exact design, but with Vegito and Super Saiyan 3 Goku where he is, but replace Super Saiyan 2 Goku with Super Saiyan 2 Vegeta. That way, it amplifies the symbolic gesture that Vegito is the combined might of those 2 heroes and expands the recognizability of the characters on the cover. Yeah, like that. Overall, I'd say the Japan and US arts are tied. As for the music, it's similar to what we heard in Budokai 1, but better. Way better, actually. I think there's 1 or 2 tracks that just got straight up reused from the first game, to be honest, but I'm really feeling like these tracks are a major improvement over the first game. The whole soundtrack is just a much more realized execution of a lot of the ideas the first game was trying to achieve. The hybrid electronica rock sound the first game seemed to be chasing sounds far more natural and fleshed out in this title. All of the legal and plagiarism issues revolving around the Budokai 1 soundtrack didn't plague this one quite as much either, as it feels like Yamamoto was coming into his own this time. I feel like these tracks sound much more original and authentic than they did in the first game. There are some standout tracks here that amp you up to get into the combat, and it makes a great audio backdrop for the whole experience. Somehow, Budokai 2 was received overall just slightly worse than the original, which makes no sense to me. I went and read several of the reviews from the time, and pretty much every review agreed that this game was a definite improvement over the first. So what the hell? The Metacritic for this game clocks in at 66%, just 1% below Budokai 1, and I can't figure out why. The common consensus seemed to be that this game was an improvement, but just not enough of one. If someone were to ask me which game I thought was better between the 2, I would tell them this one every single time.
Bobbity, magic! What are you talking about?
Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2 took all of the gameplay ideas from the first title and then refined and expanded them. It's a far more enjoyable and less frustrating experience. And on top of everything, it brings with it an incredibly unique and interesting take on how to play through the story beats of the series it's adapting. Dragon World is a really creative addition to the game that feels far more immersive and interesting than anything we've seen in a Dragon Ball game so far. Although I did find the character roster once again overall lacking and featuring some questionable inclusions, not to mention that although Babbidi's spaceship is a far better bonus mode than The Legend of Hercule, it still felt a little lacking and got old far sooner than it took to complete it. I was honestly expecting to finish this game with the feeling that it had nothing to make it worth trying over the other games in the series. But I can honestly say that if you're a pretty hardcore fan of the series and you missed out on this one like I did, then there's definitely some fun to be had here, and it might be worth it to go grab a copy and spend an afternoon or two just having some fun in Budokai 2's Dragon World. It might not be the best Dragon Ball game out there, but it's definitely one of the most unique.
Why, you? What have you done? Vegeta and Kakarot have been united, so I guess that makes me Vegito.
No, I guess it makes you dead.
Thanks so much everyone for tuning in and hanging out with me while I talked about this quirky little hidden gem of a game. Getting to finally sit down and actually experience the whole thing for myself was a far more enjoyable time than I was initially expecting, and I hope you got something out of it. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button, as that always helps me out with the algorithm. And if you're not subscribed yet, then make sure you do so you can be here next time I drop a video. Members of the channel get early access to most of my videos, typically 2 weeks ahead of time, and the support goes to helping my quest to shine a light on all of these awesome older titles that need more coverage. So, if that sounds like something you'd love to support, then this is the channel for you. Thanks again so much for watching everyone, and I hope to see you on the next video. But until then, that's all I've got for you.